Hey everyone, welcome back to the Multi-Location Marketing Show. I'm Elliot Olson, and I'm joined here with Matt Nickols, our CEO, and Kevin Mullett. Kevin, what's your title again? I feel like you like Matt do a lot of different things.
VP of junk and stuff. I do things. VP of program services for our company.
Awesome. So today we've got an exciting episode. If you're into multi-location marketing, obviously trying to sharpen the spear, we're actually going to talk about the difference between subdirectories, subdomains, and standalone domains, and kind of like not only define those, but just understand what are the advantages and disadvantages of maybe using each of those when you're deploying an organic program. And also kind of give you a path on how to decide maybe which option is best for you. So we got a lot of experience in the room. If this is your first time on the podcast, we've been doing this for 20 years now, guys. And so this is everything we're giving you. There's no one-way answer, as I'm sure you'll kind of hear from the guys. But the whole idea behind this is just helping you do what you do better and making your life easier when it comes to things like this. So Matt, if you could just kind of give us a breakdown, what are the three what are those three kind of different structures that we talked about, I got to mention, and then kind of give like maybe a simple definition of each of those, and then we can kind of go into really the disadvantages.
Sure. So if you're looking to do marketing at the local level, go back and listen to a bunch of the previous episodes. We talk about the benefits of that at length, and that's kind of what we're about. But there has to be a way that you tell Google, hey, I've got a business, a location, a representative of my brand, a franchise, an agent, a dealer, whatever the case may be, in a local market. And the way that Google has moved really over the last decade is they're really giving preference to what we call local relevance. So if they can tell, hey, you're in this market, they know consumers in that local market are looking for a certain service that is really local. And so they give a tremendous amount of preference to those local businesses, right? And so you want to set up as a multi-location business, hopefully that's what you are in listening to this podcast. You want to set up a way to have a web presence, right, at the local level for each market that you're involved in and that you have representation in. And so there's really three ways to do that. One is what we call a subdirectory approach, and that is your domain, let's say acmewidgets.com / the name of the location, or a lot of times people will do / the state / the city. And then /maybe if you only have one location per metro area, that might work for you. Or you might go / state / city / location name, or location 123, right? To get a really specific location. So that's what we call a subdirectory. And we'll get into the pros and cons of these in a bit. But the second option would be, I would say, like a standalone domain, right? And that would be you go and you register a domain with GoDaddy or Google or whoever you want to register. There's a million domain registrars out there. It's going to cost you somewhere between usually $10 and $20 a year for kind of a .com domain that's available that you can register. And then you can have a top level domain for each of your locations with a website, that points to. And, typically that's going to be something like either the major service that you do in the domain name. So we've seen people use something like shuttersindianapolis.com, shuttersaustin.com, shuttersdallas.com, in all the different markets that you're in, it could be, whatever, tutoring Dallas, so that's very common. Or it could be something with your brand name, so we have a client, Sunburst Shutters, and they use sunburstshuttersindy.com, sunburstshuttersorlando.com, sunburstsshuttersdallas.com. So the nomenclature can be whatever, but a domain is standalone. You register it, you pay for it, you create the DNS entries of where it's going to go, and you have a standalone website on that. And then the third option would be using a subdomain. So more similar to kind of the first one in a way, but still the thing about a subdomain is you don't have to register a new domain. So if it's acmewidgets.com is your main brand, you could, anything that you put in front of it with a dot can be a subdomain. So you could have austin.acmewidgets.com. You could have dallas.acmewidgets.com, right? And in order to do that, you don't have to go register a new domain like you do with the top level with GoDaddy or whoever you're using. That's simply a DNS entry. So DNS is a service, obviously, that controls where all these web addresses point to an IP address. So you simply go into your DNS server, have your IT group go in there and say, we want orlando.acmewidgets.com and we want it to point to this IP address. In every other way, it's the same as a top level domain. If I type in sunburstshuttersorlando.com, and that could point to a website, or I could have orlando.sunburstShutters.com point to that exact same website on the same server. There's just two different ways of getting there. And so those are really the three main options, right? Again, subdirectory, it's on your website. Google views that as part of this website. It's a location page or a series of location pages within that domain. Standalone domain, you buy it, Google says, hey, this is its own entity. And a subdomain, which usually Google says this is its own entity, but they sometimes, there's some differences there. And I'll let Elliot explore those things in more detail. But I think does that make sense?
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, awesome explanation. I mean, that's you broke that down, like that's like quick and dirty of that. So Kevin, how? Yeah, no, that's great. Kevin, how would you describe like a subdirectory in terms of the advantages of when you'd want to use that, and maybe when people use it, and then maybe like some drawbacks of maybe only depending on a subdirectory to create value in search?
Yeah, so there would be very few instances where, and as a matter of fact, I can't think of one right off the top of my head of where you would not, for a corporate, have your locations in a directory so that people can see them as part of your main acmewidgets.com site. So there are just, again, I can't think of an instance of why you would not avail yourself of having that directory structure. It's directories just like other directories that you have on your website, right? I mean, /blog is technically a directory, right? And then you put things underneath that. /products is a thing, and you have various products or services that are under that. /locations is just another thing that you put on there so that you give people the information and Google the information so that those locations are known to them. And fortunately, our system is designed, the MarketSnare platform is designed to be, innocuous to which method you wanted to use. I mean, the system doesn't care which method you want to use. It's applying the right one at the right time. So, yeah, I can't think of a reason why a business, a company-owned business, a corporate-owned entity would not want to do that. If it's a dealer network or if it's some kind of a single product that is sold at a different location, then that might be a situation where they decide, do I really want to include a store that sells competitive product as well as mine, right? So you may then jump to one of the other methods to get more value in that local market and not have that be part of your corporate. So I didn't manage to think of a situation where that would occur.
But nonetheless, I think one of the things that we always talk about and that we see is this concept that we call local relevance, right? So while everyone will want to have one of those pages on site, and I think the trick is how do we take advantage of Google's proclivity to kind of favor local businesses, and what makes them say, hey, because if you go and you do a search of any service topic, something that's going to trigger a local intent query with the map and everything, you always see in the results set a mix, right, of some aggregators, some national brands, but a lot of local individual single location businesses, coming up and doing really well in those rankings. Why do you see that happening?
Yeah, and I mean, I think that gets
because
to
they look really relevant.
Yeah. It's pretty easy. It's pretty relevant.
Yeah.
That gets right to the point of why we created MarketSnare, which Matt knows full well, and we all do on this call, is that a drawback of doing that is you're stopping short. You're leaving opportunity on the table, which is why we do what we do. And the reason that people typically do that is because they don't know that that's a thing, that they don't know that they're leaving opportunity, or they don't know that a solution exists for that. It's easy because we've done the directory, we've done everything that we can do.
I think that's key right there. A lot of it is like, I control it all. It's right here. It's in my subdirectory.
That makes sense.
Well, it's part of the same CMS. It's like, if I want to add a location, I go in, I check a box, I type in some information, I hit save, and boom, it's up there, right? And the thought of subdomains or independent websites is just like I can't imagine the amount of work and lack of control that I would have. Right.
Some people think of it from a cost perspective. Yep. And while it may or may not be expensive to do additional things, the real question is how much value does it bring to you, right? Like, how much extra revenue would that generate if you could control more of the search results, if you could be visible more, if you have more click-throughs because you look more credible, which we'll get into more here in a bit.
Yeah, there's like the value of each of these. There's a value of like time capital, team, how you implement something based on your current structure at your company. And then there's the actual SEO value, the revenue generating value that comes from picking a strategy that, is best for your business.
Exactly. And I think that's what really separates these two. So there's kind of like subdomains and standalone domains. We can get into the pros and cons of that, and we will, versus a corporate directory or a directory, subdirectory structure. But there's more underlying that, because a subdirectory structure everyone should have, and we highly recommend that. You have to have information on your locations. The question is, as Kevin said, is that enough to get you the kind of rankings across the widest number of keywords and geographic terms in that area, or are you missing out, right? And so then you want to pair that with one of the other strategies. And the other thing that I would say about the subdirectory, because its strength is also its weakness in terms of SEO, right? So its strength is that it's part of a larger domain with thousands of pages and lots of backlinks probably, and good domain authority. And so the old school thought was that was the way to just really penetrate those markets, because you're getting better domain authority. But what the other side of the coin is, you're diluting your relevance to that local market. So if you have a location page and it's one page of thousands of pages, how relevant do you look for Dallas? When you've got one page and you've got thousands of pages on your site, you don't look very relevant. I mean, it's like less than, 0.1% probably of the content on your site is about your services in Dallas. So when you go to a subdomain or a subdirectory structure, now those are independent things. And if you have a site all about Dallas, it's going to be much more relevant to that local market. Now, you still need to build authority at the local level and those kinds of things that are best practice from SEO. But what you're doing by moving or adding subdomain and standalone domains is now Google sees those as individual independent entities. Now there's some caveat there, but Kevin, why don't you jump into?
Yeah, we're kind of bleeding into the next thing. But I did want to say, I think what I love about what you said is, I think it sounds like super simple, but I think a lot of times multi-location businesses, like, they're really not. It's like you have an amazing opportunity because you have a physical location. Like, you have a physical location there. So instead of thinking from a perspective of like what's if I'm picking a subdomain or a standalone domain or a subdirectory, instead of thinking about it, what is the easiest option for me because of human capital? Like, allow yourself to think, how do I leverage the actual physical location I have to implement a strategy that's going to benefit my business the most? Because most people are thinking the opposite of that. They're thinking of like, maybe it's not e-com or like some of these other kind of strategies, but they're thinking of, how do I take this centralized approach to creating a really locally relevant, digital kind of location or like presence, or landscape, or like a territory on a digital territory. But they're not thinking of, how do I leverage my actual physical location, which is what Google gives preference to. Because if you have a physical location and it's worth people even finding you, that means that there's some sort of decision that they're making there. And so Google's gonna they're going to give people, they're going to want to connect people to that location. They're going to give you local preference on that. So I think hopefully that makes sense. Kevin, I know you wanted to add something else, and then let's go into sub. So
just real quickly
on
domains. On subdirectories, the thing to consider is first of all, again, we suggest there's a time and a place for all of them, right? But what ends up happening is the mistake or the thought process is I got my directory, check, that's off my list, right? But then the corporate, the C-suite says, hey, why is Billy Joe Bob's Bait and Tackle beating in that presence or in that area, right? For that
local digital territory or whatever.
Digital territory, right? Why are they coming up when we have all of these backlinks and we have all this huge domain authority and we have and all of this other stuff? Because like what Matt said is it's not relevant to that local market. It doesn't have a ton of reviews that point to that local domain, right? So again, it's just the danger is leaving opportunity on the table and or not knowing that a method exists to move you equal to somebody who is absolutely part of that local market. And so that's awesome. What we're discussing today.
So what is this kind of, is a good transition into standalone domains. I mean, what are the advantages and disadvantages of a standalone domain? Matt, do you want to take that one?
Well, a standalone domain, I mean, obviously the advantages are, and Kevin can provide some color here because he knows more about this than I do, but a standalone domain is without question going to be looked at like its own entity by Google, right? So if you have a website and it's all about shutters in Indianapolis and all different types of shutters, and maybe you do other types of window treatments and things like that, Google has no doubt that, hey, this is about shutters in Indianapolis. So if people are searching for Plantation Shutters, Indianapolis, chances are like that site's going to do really well, especially if they're doing all the other right things, And, we all know the basics of SEO, but Google's indexing that and it's saying Indianapolis and shutters, it's 100% relevant to that. Whereas on the subdirectory side, if you have a location page, generally that's one page, maybe it's a handful of pages, but generally it's one page saying Sunburst Shutters Indy, here's our address and the services we do here, right? But how can that one page connect the dots to all these different services and ways people search for things that you want to come up for? There's just not enough there. It's not enough meat on the bone, right? So while it can let Google know, hey, I do these things in this market, versus this other site over here has tons of pages all about these different services, all about Indianapolis and things happening in the local market, and their blogs and everything like that they're doing is all building authority, in that one market. So when you do a standalone domain, you're telling Google, hey, this is its own entity. Now, obviously, you can't have duplicate content and things like that. Go back and listen to some of our other podcasts. We talk about ways that you can do that. But I think the sentiment has always been it's too hard, it's too much work. And there's technology now. And that's what we do. We provide technology that makes that easy so that you can do that kind of a strategy with the same effort that you're doing the directory side of it.
We're underlying this with the assumption that you have great content on a website.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. I mean, all things considered equal.
And also that you have a business listing connected to that location.
You have to do all the other things.
Those two things are gonna massively. But
exactly.
I just want to preface that, throw that in there.
The domain itself.
You can't not do those things. You can't. Even if you have a standalone domain, you can't just put a landing page there and just expect that that's going to outperform.
No.
There are other
things there.
It's not just the domain
part of it. Since that's what we're talking about. What the domain part of it does is it just says to Google, "Hey, I'm a standalone entity and treat me as such," right? And so when you're doing all the other things right, that really focuses all of your authority and everything to that one market. And that's really powerful if you can do that at scale across all these markets. Now, instead of having this broad beam floodlight shining on all my markets, I'm like bringing it down to a laser and focusing on that market. And then I'm doing it in this market and this market. And there are tricks of doing that at scale and doing it well and doing it time effectively. But that's what you're doing. Now, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just want to, I think something that'll really help people understand this is if you have a subdirectory structure, which we already said is a good idea, generally speaking, but typically, as Matt has said, that's only going to be 1 or 2 pages, maybe 3 pages about that local business. Like you might have a bio about the staff there. You might have the services that particular location offers. But anyway, you're going to have 1 to a few pages for that. What you're not typically going to have and doesn't make sense under the directory structure is to have each service or product spelled out in great depth and a separate blog. That doesn't make sense under a subdirectory structure. So basically you have
for like each location,
blog,
for each location is what you're saying.
For each location.
Yeah.
So you have the blog, that's the corporate blog and voice, and you have the corporate service definitions and the corporate products, right? But these are just the locations. What Matt is referring to is when you have a unique, fully qualified top-level domain, you're now shifting it to be, what do you, in this market that we're talking about, Indy, at the time of year that it's appropriate for Indy, should you have your HVAC system serviced to be ready for winter, right?
Which is a lot different than Atlanta.
Exactly. You're not going to talk about you're not going to talk about heating repair in a Miami location in October. That doesn't make any sense.
Whatever.
And so what Google is really looking for is, do you answer the questions and solve the problems of people in this market? And a fully qualified, unique top-level domain allows you to make that entire argument that, yes, we do that, not just this is where we are, right? There's two totally different concepts.
So what are the disadvantages of using a standalone domain or a top-level domain?
Well, I would say, and I didn't get to that, but basically, there's cost. It's minimal, but you're looking at $10 to $20 a year. Whether it's GoDaddy or Google or whoever your domain registrar is. That's the main factor. I've heard some people concerned about brand confusion. But, we've always taken the stance that, you can handle that with your nomenclature. So there are different types of nomenclatures you can use. Some people will use a domain that has like a major service in it. Now, there used to be something called an exact match domain that was a thing. Google swears, well, for a long time they swore that wasn't a thing, but it clearly wasn't. I think it's less now. There may be something to that, but it's not near what it used to be. So we don't necessarily recommend people go out and buy, IndianapolisShutters.com. I mean, that is a strong domain, for other reasons, for marketing reasons and things. And how much does it help you SEO? We don't know. But I think it's a lot less than it used to be. But so some people will do that, they'll pick like kind of their major service HVAC services, FortWayne.com, that kind of a thing. And then HVAC services, Dallas.com, or a lot of people will use the brand. So we like Sunburst Shutters is a client of ours. They use Sunburst Shutters Indy.com, Sunburst Shutters Austin.com, Sunburst Shutters Orlando.com. So those are ways to kind of keep that brand, consistent, and you want to do something consistent. But if you have independent dealers, for example, we have programs where they do, Bob's HVAC, and it becomes their main site. Sometimes they have a corporate site and this becomes a supplemental, right? So maybe it's, maybe they do lawn care, right? Or lawn equipment, and they sell tractors and all this stuff. They might have a steel local website, and it might be, IndianapolisSteel.com, or whatever. So there's a lot of different strategies you can do, and you can kind of register whatever you want. But that's kind of the main drawback would just be the cost, and then you got to manage the DNS and things like that. So a lot of our clients, we do that for them because we have tools to do that at scale. But if you're doing it with your own IT department and things like that, you got to register all those domains, you got to manage them, you got to go in and create records to point to your DNS servers and some of those types of things. So there's just, when you're looking at a subdirectory, obviously that's just using your CMS to create something. You don't have to do any of that. With a standalone domain or even a subdomain, you got to do DNS entries and stuff. The standalone domain will cost you money every year to keep that up and keep that registered. So that's the primary. Kev, do you have any other things on that?
I forget. Are we on positives or negatives right now?
We're on negatives for drawbacks for using a standalone domain.
Now, really, the only major drawback to doing a fully qualified top-level domain is the cost. And outside of that, which is why we keep talking about how our platform doesn't care which method we use or combinations of methods that we use, because there could be reasons for each. So essentially, when it comes down to it, you're talking about the difference between $10 to $20 a month.
Yeah, it's kind of negligible, isn't it? I mean,
it's a negligible thing.
And we're not, we're not really going into, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, there's a little hassle. I mean, one could argue, in one market, or 3 markets out of 150, we can't get that exact domain. I mean, so you alter it slightly because somebody happens to be sitting on that domain. I suppose you could make an argument that that's a negative, but it's an inconsequential one.
Yeah, and we're staying on the topic of your domain and subdirectories and subdomains, right? We're staying on that topic. Now, if we were to venture into what happens after you deploy a local website on that domain, manage the content and all that, there could be some definite drawbacks there if you don't have a system for implementing a strategy around that. We're staying, I'm just trying to subdue the maybe some of the thoughts that people are thinking ahead there. So, we have a lot of other episodes on that if you want to dig into, what actually happens after you decide on a domain kind of structure or decision. But
I do think it's important to understand that even whether it's our CMS or another CMS, there are slight differences between subdirectory usage, day-to-day usage, and subdomain or fully qualified domain usage. There is not that much difference, whether it's our CMS or others, between subdomain usage and domain usage, fully qualified top-level domain usage.
Yeah.
The change is in the back end that Matt talked about with the whether or not you have to buy domains or not, which we'll get into here in a second.
Yeah, Matt, can you break down subdomains, advantages of a subdomain?
Advantages. I mean, the main thing is like you have some
or perceived advantages.
Cost savings, right? So subdomain and ease, right? I mean, it's like you register the domain once. So let's say we're going to have, a domain. It could be part of your national domain, right? Or like, for example, it could be John Deere. Let's use John Deere. They're not our client, but John Deere as an example. You have johndeere.com. You could have indianapolis.johndeere.com. So you already have the domain. Or a lot of times we'll see johndeeredealer.com, and then we'll have, indy.johndeeredealer.com, right, as a structure. And it's easy. You don't have to think about it. It's just like, hey, we're going to put the name of the market or the name of the location or the dealer in front of it with a dot, and then the johndeeredealer.com. So there's no thought required. When you're registering a top level domain, you're going into a new market, you got to search, is it available? The standard nomenclature. If it's not, what do we do? Or if you've got local dealers, there's always some thought, into that. It's not a big deal. You just got to think through what's available and what's the best option, and you do it. But that is an advantage of a subdomain, is that you have the main part of the domain, and then the subdomain is just like, it is what it is, and it's there. You put one entry into your DNS server. This is what the subdomain is. I'm pointing it to this IP, and you're done, right? And it doesn't cost you anything extra. So you're just paying for that one domain instead of for each of the individual domains. Now, like we said, when you're talking about $10 to $20 a year per domain, it's not a major cost, but it is a cost. So subdomains are cheaper, and subdomains are. Some people would say it's more brand consistent, because I've just got this one domain and now I'm tying this to it. So it's like, like we talked about, in indy.johndeeredealer.com. Well, okay, this is part of johndeere.com, and it's this city. So some people think that's less.
They like the look of it.
Yeah,
the
look of it, the feel, the marketing side of it.
That makes sense.
Makes a little bit more sense. So that's kind of more of a personal preference. It doesn't really matter in terms of how Google sees.
We don't see click-through differences on that really to speak of. So,
yeah, in the data that we've looked at. So that's the kind of the positive, I would say, of the subdomain.
What would be a disadvantage? Are there any for
well,
subdomains?
And Kevin, I know, will want to opine on this.
Maybe kind of similar in some respects to a standalone domain in terms of, if you were to look further down the line in the strategy, if you didn't have a software to be able to implement a local website strategy, but again, we're staying on the domain here. Yeah, is there any, Kevin, or?
Well, just from a domain,
or maybe just.
Well, you asked me first, I've got to just give my answer, and then I'll take it over to Kevin. Well, yeah, the negative side of it, would be, just on the flip side, sometimes there's confusion. Maybe people think, well, it's less confusing brand wise because it's clearly showing our domain and this is a sub part of it. But sometimes there can be confusion too from consumers that are used to seeing maybe just a top level.com, right? And so I would think it's not that big of a deal because there's all kinds of crazy stuff out there now, but you could get some level of confusion there. It's not, but by far the biggest thing, just from an SEO perspective, would be there is a chance that Google changes, or because they've changed this over the past, how they see subdomains. Do they see that part of the broader domain that they're involved in, or do they see that as a standalone entity? When you register a standalone domain, there's no doubt it's standalone. It lives by itself. When you have a subdomain, there are instances where we've seen that Google has said, well, this is kind of part of this broader domain, and you don't get that local relevance building that you would if it was viewed as standalone. Now, we do have clients that we've implemented that wanted subdomains. We've tested them. They worked great. They're viewed as standalone, and they kick butt, and they're doing great. But we've seen it the other way too. So I know Kevin's got a lot of thoughts on this, so I'm gonna kick it over to you to kind of expand on that.
Well, there's some practical things, and then there are some what if things. Practically speaking, if you're in a dealer network type situation, independent local dealers, well, then obviously a subdomain would probably be less likely to be the direction you want, because if that person is helping to pay for the program and so forth, and you wanted to transfer ownership with a fully qualified, unique top-level domain, you could just give them that domain and you're done. You move on. If it's sitting on a subdomain structure, you can't do that. You could migrate the site, but then when you do that, which we won't get into, but there's a whole lot of things that could shake up with the search results because you've told them it's a completely different site now. So if you move indie.acmewidgets.com to bobsindie.widgets.com, Google is going to see that as two totally different websites. There's ways to do it properly, but there still will be some mix up. So transferring ownership would be one situation that there's just a clear, it's just a matter of fact, it's a clear delineation.
If you were to do that in the future, it's an advantage to kind of start out with a standalone
with
domain
a fully qualified top-level domain. Now, if it's all corporately owned, then it really doesn't matter because you're not going, if you transfer ownership, you're transferring ownership of the entire corporation, not necessarily an individual location, although one could argue that from a future, if you're planning to sell in the future, maybe that does matter. But anyway, we're getting into the weeds on that. The softer side of things is that, and Matt and I have talked about this a lot over the years, there's maximizing value and mitigating risks, right? So when you have a fully qualified domain, you're mitigating the risks of Google changes, right? Because if it may hit one or two locations, but taking out the entire group is less likely when they are independent sites with local relevance, right? Now, you could also say that while you're mitigating that risk, what's the value parity, right? Well, unfortunately, this is where it gets fuzzy and why we say it depends, which is a common thing within the search industry. The only way you would know, so let me rephrase that. Just because it works as subdomains, which we have ample evidence that it does not mean that it might not work better as fully qualified top-level domains if you're going after very competitive terms. So if you aren't able to get the full traction that you would like, we've seen some evidence, and other people in the industry have seen some evidence that when they go from a subdomain to here, that there
to a
may
standalone
be
domain.
From a standalone domain to a subdomain. I'm sorry, from a
subdomain to a standalone domain.
Standalone, let's get that right, that there may be increased value in doing so. But you're never really going to know unless you make that exact move with exactly the same markets, with exactly the same keywords, and et cetera. So if it's working, which we've seen that it's working, and you're getting leads in, then it becomes a question about, is there more on the table that you could have?
Awesome. Well, I want to be conscious of time, but before we kind of close out this episode, I was hoping that one of you could give kind of just a simple, we've given a lot of information. So there's a lot of people that are probably okay, I kind of have an idea of what I would want to do. There's still questions I have. What are 3 steps that someone can take, simple steps, and the way that they consider what to use? Where do they start? And then where's kind of just where do they start? What questions need to be asked?
Well, the first thing is, how I like to say, what is the objective that you're going after? First and foremost, most people want organic visibility. Why? Because search is the greatest mechanism that humanity's ever devised to connect people looking for something with people that can deliver that, right? And Google does a great job of that. So if you
defining the value,
and to say, what am I trying to do? Am I just trying to check a box and say, I've got something for my dealers and they're handling it all and I'm not touching it? Most organizations that are into marketing are looking for ways to win, to get better results. And the first step in that is really doing an analysis. What I always recommend is you take, 25 to 50 of your top keywords and then look at them in each local market and see how you're doing. If I am in Atlanta and you're in Atlanta and you sell, pest control, you better be, if I type in Atlanta pest control or pest control Atlanta or pest control near me being searched from Atlanta or pest control being searched from Atlanta, how are you doing? Where are you showing up? And understanding that, if you're the number one ranked organic listing, that's roughly 35% of the clicks. Number two is like 15. Number three might be 8 or 9. And after that, you're like falling off the table. So you got to understand, like, to break into there, what does it take? What do you do? And if that's your objective, then, you really got to look at strategies on how you're going to localize everything in your content. Now, if you're doing that through a directory, you have to be able to get, again, go back and listen to some of our podcasts, but you have to get localized content. So if you don't want to mess with local websites and really take it to the next level, do a directory, get a great directory structure, research on that, get unique, locally relevant content on each of those pages, right? And try to add new things on a regular basis. So like if that's your objective, you always want a subdirectory. The question is, how do you make that as effective as possible? And then if you want to up your game and really dive into the local level, go back and listen to some of the other podcasts. But I think the choice is really between, does it make sense to have top level domains for each of these, as Kevin articulated, that you can transfer to somebody that you are assured is going to be unique and locally relevant? Or do you really care more about, saving a little bit of money and, the branding, side of it? And the other thing you can do is you can set up an A/B test. We talk about that a lot with our clients. So like when we implement local website strategies with SEO, it's very easy to say, let's take these, 20 sites and put them on a subdomain and put these 20 sites and put them on a standalone. If you really have confusion of what you think is going to work or not, there's just not that's the best way to know. There's no, simple answer that says you always want to use a standalone. If you want to make sure that your sites are treated independently, do standalone domains, right? If you're more concerned on the brand side, and that is really important to you, I think subdirectories are a good choice, but you want to watch it closely. Or I'm not subdirectories. Subdomains are a good choice, but you want to watch it closely and make sure you're getting, index. And just, as you do that research and that data, we have clients getting upwards of 75% of their important terms in the top 3, 95% on page 1. So if you're doing everything that you need to, like, that's kind of,
and a much more and way more
terms,
way more terms, way more geography.
Exactly. And so I'm just saying, like, that's why I say look into it. Don't just rely on me. I'm saying these are the results we're getting for clients, and so that's what's possible, right? Yeah. So if you're far below that, the good news is you have tremendous chance for growth and upside, and that can make you look like a rock star if you're a marketing person and you go in and say, hey, I can implement some of these things and look at the growth that we're getting. Like, you're going to be beloved by your local representatives, your franchises, and your corporate structure. So go make it happen. It's not hard to do. And if you want to dive into it, we're happy to get on the phone and chat with people and kind of look at the pros and cons.
I think that's really the danger that I would love to leave people with. Is the danger is being complacent and not looking into other alternatives. If you're simply checking it off and saying, I was tasked with getting this dealer directory done, and I got it, we're done, and or that the higher ups have only given you 10 important keywords and you're not looking at submarkets. We can't even get into that here, but almost every primary market has submarkets, and that directory page is not going to be relevant into those submarkets. So it's not just the primary terms and those 10 that your boss said, it's the 200, and it's the variations in the submarkets. And so if you're interested in that, then you need to look past just dealer, locator, directory structure and start saying, what else can I do at scale to get my locations the visibility and the chance that that's going to make us all money? That's really
those submarkets can add up, depending on the vertical. But I mean, I've seen anywhere from 30 to 50% of the organic traffic coming from secondary markets, which would be like suburbs or other geographic ways people search for it. So really make an impact as well. That's another.
Yeah, search. So quantify your opportunity. Understand how to quantify your opportunity. We have a podcast episode all about that. You can check back. We'll link in the description. Once you understand what's possible out there. Now, again, that can be kind of challenging because there's a lot of different opinions. People are claiming different results. A lot of times the strategies and the things that we're recommending, without the right tech, people are not, they're speaking out of like the experience of trying to do one-off things, or everything kind of comes from that. So just keep that in mind. But what our challenge to you is, and what we would recommend is really trying to quantify that opportunity. Take everything, all the negatives out of it. Just what is the best thing that's for, if I could ideally have this, what would be the best, and how do I quantify that? And how do I make decisions based on the revenue, right, that can be generated, the value at the total end value, and then work back from there, right? Okay, once I understand, here's my, total addressable outcome that can happen, right? Revenue, leads, all this stuff based on if I were to apply a strategy where, I have a local website, I have unique, way more keywords than, than are possible just maybe through a directory page or a corporate website. What is possible if I have all that? We've got data to support that. We can show you what's possible. There's also other data out there available. But then once you decide that, then it's like, okay, what is it going to take me to make that happen, right? Then you start talking about your different domain structures, things like that. I'm going to have a subdirectory, and I'm probably going to have a subdomain, like Matt said. And then you can kind of figure out, also taking that human capital aspect, like what am I going to need in order to make this work within my organization? Because I maybe have a big team and there's a lot of different decision makers here that need to be bought in, or I have a small team and I'm just really going to need some support with that. So that's, would you guys agree that would probably be a good 3 kind of like buckets to think about when you're starting to approach considering, a domain structure,
for sure.
For your organization.
Yeah, for sure. And remember, it's not about, you're going to have subdirectory no matter what, right? So the real question is, are you going to do something that's more localized, that's standalone? And, the de facto is registering unique standalone domains, because there's no doubt about what that's going to do. And unless you have a good reason not to do that, that's what the recommendation would be. If you just, from a brand standpoint, this is really, you feel really strongly about that, then pursue that and look into it, or A/B tests, those types of things. So,
or spend some more time like engaging with like these ideas. It's not timing is a thing for any organization. So just keep that in mind. You want to do what's best for you. Obviously stuff's working where you're at, so a lot of things we're talking about are really like plays that people take when they're looking to bring their organization to the next level. A
lot of the people that we talk to, let's be honest, a lot of the people that we talk to do those directories, and then they see that a standalone website is beating them in their markets for the keywords that they want, that they know are valuable to them. And then they start trying to figure out, do I have a play here? Is there a way to do this? Because if there's, as Matt was saying, if there's 4 single standalone top level domain websites, fully qualified websites, and your directory is at number 6, first of all, you're getting a literal fraction of the clicks and visibility. And these standalones are obviously beating you. So what is your option? Your directory is not working. It's not going to be normally a better directory. So what's your options? And so you can look into that. And, you know, again, we've repeated it several times, and we're happy to talk to you about it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the option is out there. There are solutions.
Awesome. Well, I think we covered this pretty thoroughly. So if you're still with us, thank you so much for listening to this episode. Again, if you have any questions, we are here to support you. We'll have our information in the show notes. But yeah, I hope our goal was to offer a lot of value around this, kind of get you thinking about what's possible. So we hope you enjoyed it. And yeah, we'll see you on the next episode of the Multi-Location Marketing Show.
All right.